Hi. It's been a while since I've just randomly chatted racing, and the last weekend that has just gone is this year's edition of the Le Mans. Which is the 88th edition. Originally it was supposed to be back in June time, and that in itself actually had an effect on the race because it's later on in the year. It meant there was 2 hours less daytime, which obviously could have an effect on various temperatures and stuff as well. So while it's not a massive change, it was a little bit of a step into the unknown. And the other big difference of it as well this year, of course, was not having any crowds. So the atmosphere was slightly different, but of course, once you're on the track, it's about the racing. So, other than a few comments from the commentators about how they were missing the smells of hot dogs and stuff sizzling away on barbecues, and the lights from the wheel as it was going round while the truck cars were going past it at night time, we still got to have a race, and that ultimately is what people will remember and what they were after. In terms of an all-time classic race, not really, but there's still a few stories to tell. So, for those who don't know too much about Le Mans or the WEC, which is the primary series that the cars come from for Le Mans, it consists mostly of 4 different classes. And you've got the LMP1s, which are like the super rocket ships, but there's only Toyota which still run the hybrid drivetrains or are a manufacturer. There's a couple of other teams in that category who are privateers who had a brave effort at it. Rebellion, who I love, but this was their last year as an entry, so there was a little bit of, in their last year, could they finally do the big one? Could the miracle happen, and could they overturn Toyota? So that's an interesting sort of, that was an interesting one, and I hope that something might happen. No disrespect to Toyota, but it's never easy at Le Mans. But when you're effectively racing yourself, it kind of helps. There's a reason why they've won it the last 3 years. And in fairness, it makes up for a lot of bad luck they've had in many years as well. It was only a few years ago where the car cut out on the last lap, and because they didn't finish the race, even though they'd been leading right up until that point, they got nothing for it, which pretty sucks. After 23 hours and like 57 minutes or something, and being in the lead at that point, and then the car cutting out, And the year after that, they were running very competitively as well, and it all kind of went wrong in the space of about half an hour as well. So, in fairness to Toyota, it's, karma kind of paying them back a little bit. But, so the interesting one there was like, flipping a coin. Would Toyota's luck be in or be out? Would Rebellion and their last race in the top flight be able to actually give them a race, or and get a good result? Would Bicolis actually finish a race? Because they've got a pretty appalling reliability, luck and track record for finishing races. They're the other team in LMP1. So side stories there, but it's not where the main action is in terms of like the competitive racing. LMP2 and GT basically is where it's at for that. LMP2, you had a lot of decent teams that were in with a shout at it. Jackie Chan DC Racing a few years ago got on the overall podium, which is incredibly unusual for an LMP2 team. Then you've got Team Racing Netherlands, who are a favourite. People love them for lots of reasons. They're an interesting, exciting kind of team, do a lot on social media. have a very good driver lineup in Nick de Vries and Guido van der Garde, as well as obviously the team boss himself, whose name has escaped me at the moment, and I really do apologise for that for Team Racing Netherlands fans. But yeah, you also had United Autosport giving it a good effort with a solid driver lineup as well. Jota, or Yota? Oh, I say Jota, rightly or wrongly. In with a shot as well. You know, before you get to Alpine, who have been pretty dominant there the last 2 years. They're definitely one of the bigger teams. So going into that category, not having a clue, it could be any one of about 10 teams potentially winning that one. Team Racing Netherlands seem to be very heavily fancied going into it. And you go into the GT categories, where it's very much the same. Porsche's car is only about a year or so old, but it just tends to have very good pace. The Aston Martin project is about 3 years into its program with the current car they have, and they've pretty much got on top of that. So it all comes down to BOP, which is balance of performance. Basically, how well have people done through testing, how well have they done through qualifying, and the people in charge of it will ask them to tweak certain things so that you can have cars that might be in slightly different categories, like straight out supercars racing against more GT style cars, and the performance level was similar enough so that you can have a proper race. You're always going to get cars which are slightly more of an all-round package, which, regardless of what you do to them, will still be a good car. They won't be completely nerfed as a rule. But it tends to make quite exciting close racing, because you don't just have, as a rule, one team or one car would just run away with it, which is always good. Similar thing in GTM, actually. The difference between GT Pro is that normally they're basically the newest version of the car, and all three of the drivers, or two of the drivers in it, if it was a normal 6-hour race or a 4-hour race or whatever, but because it's Le Mans, they definitely have three. They'll almost always be all platinum drivers, or a gold at the very least. Whereas LMP1, again, will be platinum or gold. LMP2 is more of a pro-am type thing, where you'll have 2 platinum or gold drivers, again mixing with a silver. And the same in GTM, where it's pro-am again, where you'll have 2 gold or platinum drivers mixing it with a silver or even a bronze driver. So it's you have so many points basically you can put in your car, and sort of almost in a role play kind of way, it's where do you put your points in terms of the strength you can have in terms of your driver lineup. But it can make for some exciting racing, because it's you could have 2 cars which are very evenly matched, and one could be on newer tyres and one could be on older tyres, and one could have their pro driver in, and another car that might in theory be quicker might have an M driver in, and over the course of 24 hours there's so many different variables that can come into it as to who's in what car when, and what tyres have they got left, how, it's it's this stupid thing almost, but even on a 24-hour race, one safety car coming out can completely scupper your race as to when it came out, what part you got caught in, because Le Mans is such a long lap, there's 3 separate safety cars, so you can find yourself a minute and a half behind a car you'd be battling with through no actual fault of your own, just because of where you got caught on track at a certain time. So, could Rebellion actually challenge Toyota? Bruno Senna got off to a staggeringly good start, managed to split the Toyotas at the start, which lasted up until about the first pit stop. But because of a safety zone thing that they had on the track, basically because where he was behind the Toyotas after the first pit stops, the Toyotas missed it the first time round, but he got caught in it twice, and having to go through that zone twice then dropped him significantly behind the leader. And that was an amount they were never going to catch up with, because although under certain circumstances the Rebellion could match the Toyota, say like in straight line speed VMAX at the end of a straight, it couldn't round most of the rest of the track. So it's like if it was racing wheel to wheel with it, it had its advantages and it could possibly stay with it. But as we've seen like in Formula One, where people are racing against Mercedes or whatever, as soon as the Merc has clear air, it's gone. And it's kind of like that with the Toyota. So once they got ahead, it was always a bit of a question of, okay, which Toyota's going to win this one? Or will the 24 hours bite them? So we had to see on that one. In LMP2, two of the main big names that we were expecting great stuff from practically got nerfed at the start, where I can't remember whether it was cooling issues with them both or what, but both the Alpine and the Team Racing Netherlands, basically the Alpine went in practically off the start, and Team Racing Netherlands dropped like a stone within about 5 laps. And it was generally, I think it was to do with overheating on the engine. So that was a bit of a shock, that they were basically fighting a rearguard action before they'd even begun. And as I said, if a single safety car can be the difference between you winning or losing in your category at Le Mans sometimes, even after 24 hours, so finding yourself 3 laps down before you've even really begun, it's always a very tall order. But it left teams like United Autosports and Jota racing at the front for pretty much the whole race, and that was great fun. It was pretty much for the whole race, the battle of the commentators, as it got called. I mean, it's a 3-car team, there's other drivers in there, but when you've got one car with Paul di Resta in and another car with Anthony Davidson in, jokes will get made. In GT Pro, the Porsches had qualified strongly, but engine setup issues or what have you, they were complaining about a lack of power going onto the straights initially, so they were having trouble holding position. I don't know if that got sorted out later on in the race or what have you, but it wasn't long before they were complaining about power steering issues as well. So it almost got to the point where, again, with the Porsches, it was just like their main goal was just finishing the race. Aston Martin seemed very much on the pace. Of course, the Ferraris seemed very much on the pace as well, and it was a good race-long dice between them. It got scuppered a little bit, unfortunately, with the Ferraris, because there seemed to be a fault with the shock absorbers. You had no less than 3 of them have shock absorber failures and end up coming into the pits with punctures and the car grinding on the floor and all sorts of things. So it was almost a case of the 51, which finished second, which is great, but they'd been in the lead for a lot of the part of the earlier race, but by the time it was like they crossed the line, it was like, with everything that had happened to the 3 other cars having failures and stuff, it was like, we're just glad they finished. So they'll take that. Aston Martin, though, absolute congratulations on their win. First and third for them was very good. Every time when they were making jokes on Twitter, I think it was the Radio Le Mans people were sort of saying, they've got to stop saying about Alex Lynn passing fastest lap, because every time they said it, he'd go post another one. The guy had a good race, but then all the Astons had a great race. Not so clear cut in GT Am, but even then, the Aston Martin TF Sport number 90 and won in that one, which could be confused for a Ferrari because it's bright red. But no, I mean, I'm a Ferrari fan. Enjoyed watching the battling or whatever else going on. Fair play to Aston Martin, they had a great race, and they've now won the constructors in WEC for this year, so fair play to them. It's always the competition, you know. If you fought a good fight and someone else was beat you, then fair play to them, and it was a good fight. So going back to LMP2, and that one was again coming right down to the wire, and it got to like 10-15 minutes left, and it's like teams having to do splash and dash pit stops, and United Autosport having to come into the pits for a splash and dash and coming out, and they were only about 5 seconds ahead of Jota, and would Jota have to stop again? And that was quite a fun one. I mean, it fell short because Jota did have to stop again, but just for that moment, it was like, oh, going across the line could be quite tense. And then going across the line, of course, you managed to have the Aston side by side of each other, despite the fact they were a few laps down, what have you. You had the two United Autosport, 22 and 32, both of which had been in the fight earlier on in the race for the win, but the 32 had had an issue, unfortunately, which had put them a fair distance behind. Then in 4th and 5th places, you had the Alpine team who had managed to come back, and the G-Drive team had also managed to come back from an issue of their own, I think. But that's the thing, is it's very, for a car to get through 24 hours without having had some scrape, get caught up in some bad luck, not have any reliability issues at all, you can't bank on it. You need to have a clear race, but if you can have a clear race, that puts you in a good position. Well done as well to two all-female teams who were in it. You had Richard Mille team racing an LMP2, number 50 car, and they managed to finish 9th, I think it was, which was a good effort on their first Le Mans. And you had Iron Lynx team, I think it is, or Iron Ladies, I think they got nicknamed, in GTM, who also finished in 9th in their category, which again is a great effort. So plenty of people supporting and cheering them on. But going back to LMP1 finally to finish off, the dream nearly happened. The number 7 car had an issue with its turbo where it had to go into the pits, and it also apparently had an issue with the floor, some bit of floor damage or something, which meant that both Rebellions managed to jump it. So you had predictably your Toyota in first place, but you never know what could happen, with Rebellions in second and third place. But unfortunately, I think it was a clutch issue or something, hampered Louis Delatraz in the number 3 Rebellion, which caused him to have a slight accident and clipped a wall and had to come into the pits. And they were in there for long enough, unfortunately, that the number 7 could jump them again. So, but still, a 1-3 for Toyota, fair play to them. They're the team that have stood when all the other hybrid people decided it was too expensive and they had other things to be doing. Toyota were the team that stood there and stuck there and said, well, we've done this, we're going to do this. They're the people who have put the investment in, still got the investment in to do it. So fair play to them, really. You can't, it's difficult to argue too much with that. And well done obviously to the drivers, because whilst there's less competition than there might have been if you still had Porsche and Audi still there, they still had to survive the 24 hours, which is an achievement in itself. And Rebellion had a good race, really. I know it's like they finished 5 laps down, but it wasn't that long back that it would have been a lot more than that. They kept a clean race, and if Toyota had an issue, they would have been there to pick up the pieces. So fair play to them as well. They've done a great job finishing 2nd and 4th. So really sorry for the number 3 car that they had that issue, because they were doing well and could have been on for the podium as well. So that's my rundown of it anyway. It's been a bit kind of all over the place and a bit gibberishy maybe, but that's sort of always the feel I have with this sort of from the couch sort of thing. It's much less scripted. It's just remembrances and off the top of my head kind of reflections for the most part. Talking about own future projects, by the way, I'm planning on doing like a midweek, the week that was type catch up in motorsport in general. Maybe once every week is the plan. Just because where I get involved in like various projects of my own, I mean, I went a few months without touching anything on junior formulas at all, and then the last few weeks it's been like all I've seemed to have done is junior formulas. So I'm not moving between and talking about motorsport in general as much as I wanted to really be doing. So I was thinking of just putting in like a weekly just catch up thing on anything I'd heard or read or seen, or just in a relaxed format, not too different to this perhaps. Just seeing how it goes. So with any luck that will exist possibly next week. We'll see how we're doing with the other thing I'm planning on doing at the moment. Should be looking in and talking about GP2, which will probably be my next video. I've started researching but not got around to actually doing any filming or editing on yet. Right, anyway, that's me. Thank you for watching. Hope you found it vaguely interesting, and bye for now.